and welcome to Spy Chat Live. I'm Amanda Olkey, Director of Adult Education here at the International Spy Museum, and I want to thank you for joining us live here in our theater and also online. We really appreciate your spending the evening with us. Tonight, our Executive Director, Chris Costa, is joined by Dr. Stacey Dixon, Principal Deputy Director of National Intelligence. Dr. Dixon was sworn in as the PDDNI on August 4th, 2021. She currently serves as the 6th Senate-confirmed PDDNI. With more than 20 years of intelligence experience, Dixon has led the intelligence community at the highest ranks. She joined ODNI after serving as the 8th Deputy Director of the National Geospatial-Intelligence Agency from 2019 to 2021. From 2018 to 2019, she was the 4th Director of the Intelligence Advanced Research Projects Activity, after serving as its Deputy Director from 2016 to 2018. And before joining IARPA, Dixon served as the Deputy Director of NGA's Research Directorate, where she oversaw geospatial intelligence research and development. She held additional leadership roles at NGA as the Chief of Congressional and Intergovernmental Affairs and Deputy Director of the Corporate Communications Office. Prior to serving at the NGA, Dixon was a staff member for the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. She first started her intelligence career at the Central Intelligence Agency in 2003, where she was assigned to the National Reconnaissance Office's Advanced Systems and Technology Directorate. I had wanted to cut her bio down a little bit, and it was all so incredibly significant that I didn't dare. So you are very impressive. We are all really amazed to have you here. After Chris and Dr. Dixon discuss the issues that are attracting their attention, we will address your questions. If you are live in the theater, I hope you received a note card and a pencil. Please write your questions, and if you'll pass them this way, there is a folder at the end, and around 7, the lovely Erin Dietrich on my team will pick up your questions. If you're with us online, you have a little bit of an advantage because you can write in your questions throughout the program using the Q&A feature. I think we will not be able to get to all of them, but we will do our best. So thank you very much. And now, enough for me. Over to you, Chris Costa.
Amanda, as always, thank you for your great introduction. Dr. Dixon, it is great to welcome you here to the Spy Museum, our theater here in L'Enfant Plaza at the International Spy Museum. I am really grateful that you came to do this program with us, particularly since I know how busy you are, not just today, but every day, right? We talked about that briefly before stepping in here, but I know what your schedule was like today, having talked to you for a few minutes. So I'd like to dive right in. I'm going to use the prerogative of the Executive Director of the Spy Museum, and I'm going to ask the first few questions, but really our audience will want to ask you questions, and we want to get to those questions. And hear your answers, to be sure. So the first question I have is related to the idea of spying in great power competition. We hear great power competition. We see it every day. There's a great deal of discussions about it. And CIA Director Burns wrote an excellent piece in Foreign Affairs that I've shared with our audience, I think back in January. It was an excellent piece because it talked about the revolution in technology that is ongoing on top of converging with this idea of great power competition. So we went from the nuclear age, we're still there, but the transition as we move from the Industrial Revolution, he kind of laid out a really cogent analysis right up front, or painted a picture. And at the end of the day, now we have quantum computing, we have artificial intelligence, we have microchips, we could go on, and we'll talk a little bit more about artificial intelligence. But to dive right in, how does these technological changes right now, this evolution, how does it impact the U.S. intelligence community's work?
Okay, so first I just want to say thank you for what you do here, educating everyone on something that many of us have sort of committed our careers to, the intelligence discipline. I really, really appreciate it, the opportunity to come and educate your audience as well as virtual and in person. So to your question, we look at technology, and it's a little background. So I'm an engineer by training, and so I'm always very optimistic about technology. We as a community also look at technology with optimism, but also look at what the threat is posed by it. So on the optimism side, how can you leverage all of the technologies you've mentioned, as well as other ones that are emerging, to make sure that they're assisting our mission, helping us do our mission better, which is essentially to be able to answer the questions of the president and the cabinet members, to serve as his and their intelligence advisor for whatever topics happen to be, whatever things happen to be happening around the world. They will look to us to be able to answer questions about them as they develop their policy. On the threat side, we also know that adversaries, state actors, non-state actors, others out there have access to technology because it's becoming so much easier to get access to very advanced things that aren't necessarily developed in the particular country. Everyone has access now to these large language models. People have access to AI. People have access, as we've seen, to missiles, UAVs, all sorts of things that were once in the purview of nation states.
Right.
Now others have them. And so you have to be looking at the threats and what those technologies pose, as well as trying to predict, of all the emerging technologies, of all the really incredible inventions that happen on any given day, which ones are ones that we need to be worried about, which ones are ones that we need to start thinking about whether we need to build in some protections against them, or how will they impact us and other countries along the way. And so opportunity, how can we use them? Threat, how do you protect against the damage that could be caused by them?
And we'll talk a little bit more about that model, threat opportunity, particularly when we talk about AI, but thank you very much. I appreciate that. So did I hear you're the 6th Senate-confirmed PDDNI?
Correct.
So you have an anniversary, the 20th anniversary of the standing up of not just the DNI, but there was the Intelligence Reform Act stood up everything from TSA to the National Counterterrorism Center. So they also enjoy an anniversary. So reflecting back on the past 2 decades, how has the office evolved to deal with this current threat landscape, which I know we're going to talk about for the next 50 minutes or so?
It's interesting. If you look, you can look structurally at our organization and see what has developed in the past 20 years that wasn't there the day that it stood up. So the organization that I had the honor to lead, IARPA, was one of those organizations that was stood up in that time period. How do you look at the hardest challenges that can be solved with science and technology, and what can you bring to bear on behalf of the whole community, not any one particular agency? You look at the centers that have created. You mentioned the National Counterterrorism Center, which was one of the original ones.
Right.
But since then, we've also started, and I'll sort of go in reverse order, the Foreign Malign Intelligence, well, actually, the Office of Economic Security and Emerging Threats, or Emerging Technology, is the most recent organization. The Foreign Malign Influence Center, we developed a couple of years ago. We have our National Counterproliferation Center, which became the National Counterproliferation and Biosecurity Center. Prior to that, the Cyber Threat Intelligence Integration Center. And so cyber, bio, WMD,
Right.
Foreign malign influence, and now just all of these opportunities that exist with economic security and economic threats, as well as the emerging tech that you mentioned. So we've structurally changed our organization to have focus areas on this, where we lead the community, bring together the experts from all across the community. And many of these organizations are not very large, but our job is to create standards, create structure, try to provide a vision for how do we as a community effectively tackle these missions, knowing that these aren't necessarily the skill sets that have previously existed in our organizations. How do we make sure they're recruiting the right people with all the backgrounds, or have access to them wherever they are in industry and academia and think tanks and the like?
And this was all a result of 9/11 and the assessments done on a failure to connect the dots and a range of issues that we read about, studied, and of course, many of us lived through. No, thank you for that.
It's gone a little bit from the failure to connect dots to how do you now enable the community to tackle these challenges, right?
That's
So
right.
we've learned definitely how to connect the dots. We've learned how to not leave information in one agency that another agency needs. We have 18 different elements many of which fall under other departments within our government. How do you bring to bear the authorities, the skill sets, the expertise to provide that holistic picture of whatever is happening in the world?
And you use the word, sorry, but you use the word standards, which that's really important. That meant there is a standardized, there's a common language, operating picture language, a sense of adhering to a certain standing operating procedure. And I appreciate that, and I saw that evolve. Okay, so there are no non-believers now, right?
We still have our naysayers,
Is
but
that
I
right?
think if you look at the leaders who are part of the community now, leading those 18 or the other 17 elements, when we come together to try to solve these hard challenges as a community, you see the buy-in. You see them leaning
Right.
forward and wanting to be part of this and seeing how working together we are much stronger than individually we would be. You see ODNI trying to take on, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence trying to take on those things that no one agency will do on its own. How do we effectively and efficiently figure out what the strategy is for data? There's so much data in our community now. We now have a
Right.
IC data strategy. We have an IC open source intelligence strategy, an OSINT strategy. We have a strategy for how we're going to look at our information environment. So all of the IT, that's been a long-term goal and one that we continue to build upon. But how do you have a strategy that allows us to be interoperable, to be able to work together most effectively so that we can not have any of the issues of the past where information was being left on the side and not being used effectively?
I appreciate that. And one final comment, we can move on. NCTC, you mentioned them, I've mentioned them, the National Counterterrorism Center. Just for, again, there are a few naysayers out there these days because it's been 20 years of experience of standards. I would make the point that NCTC was invaluable to the work that I did at the National Security Council as that belly button to plug into and for all things counterterrorism, with some exceptions. So they were great partners.
Thank you for that. And then they continue to be a valuable and necessary organization.
We're going to talk about
Okay,
that.
I'll hold off then.
Yeah, that might be a little faster ball coming at you. So the next question is related to a wider war in the Middle East, and you have to forgive me up front because I've been asking this to all our guests. We talk about it at Spy Chat because clearly the situation in the Middle East is evolving. It changes every day. In order to come and talk to you cogently tonight, I had to track the news because there were some more missile strikes. I think
Yes.
you're obviously tracking in Lebanon into northern Israel. So the question of wider war, the question of the new equation, in quotes, Iran's going to attack Israel if they are attacked, sovereign Iran is attacked. Where do you fall out as an intelligence professional? Where do you judge the possibility for a wider war breaking out in the Middle East?
It's interesting. If you look back at the conversations that we started having immediately after October 7th,
Right.
there was always the concern and the worry that this could become a regional war. I think at the time, we hoped, and I think at the time we assessed that there was really no interest from many of the parties to actually have that kind of expansion. However, having said that, you mentioned Iran. Iran is sort of that one sort of wild card there where there's sort of a little bit of a destabilizing factor and have been in that region for a very long time. Iran-backed Houthis are now involved in this conflict in ways, and they say it's because they're doing it in response to what Israel's doing in Gaza. But they're targeting commercial ships, targeting military ships, impacting that freedom of navigation, and frankly impacting commerce even between countries that would be shipping information or shipping goods through the Red Sea. That's a player that no one really expected to have the kind of impact they are. And they're also launching missiles trying to reach Israel. You've got the Iran-backed militia groups that are in Iraq and Syria, which have used this opportunity to increase attacks against Americans that are in the area. Those are two things that are sort of increasing the possibility of a larger regional conflict, while at the same time, I think you see through the conversations about ceasefires, trying to get that pushed through, that no one wants to expand this into a broader conflict. So a broader conflict is not inevitable, but it definitely will take attention and de-escalation in many times. And what's happening there at the Israel-Lebanon border is certainly a concerning one, with I think the largest salvo of missiles that's come back from Lebanon into Israel as a result of Israel killing the the Hezbollah commander. So the back and
right,
forth,
right, the tit
for tat
right.
can be very dangerous,
It's
and that
lethal,
could
yeah.
it's lethal, and it could very easily further
Spiral out of
escalate.
control.
So it's something that you keep the conversation going, and you try to make sure that there aren't any misunderstandings at those sets. But we are definitely not we're trying not to see an escalation, and I think the bulk of people in the region are also in that camp.
Yeah, even Iran has, after the slow motion 300 drones, they seem to calm down. That would seem to be for internal consumption.
I would say they've got other ways to support and create the instability. But in terms of
Right.
the direct, it's more about what Israel does, what they feel Israel does to them directly. And again, tit for tat for them as well.
It's going to be sub rosa. They're going to continue
Let's
working with their proxies and
Well, that
trying
would
to find the
absolutely
lines.
continue working with the proxies. The question is there something else that would draw them in for more fully? But I don't think any of us believes that anyone really wants to see a war among multiple countries at the same time in the region.
I appreciate that assessment. So another theater of armed conflict right now is Ukraine. And early on, when Russia invaded Ukraine, the United States made a deliberate decision. Actually, it was President Biden's policy decision, along with, if the accounts I've read are true, to include in the book New Cold Wars. Jake Sullivan, our national security advisor, was very much involved in this. And in short, what the United States did was declassified and shared intelligence. I don't usually interject my personal view on this, but my view was very positive. I think that is remarkably important that we used intelligence in a thoughtful way. Normally, historically, we are all attuned, or I was attuned when I was in the government, to seeing that intelligence, maybe, right? That would go to the senior policymakers. Only at the NSC would I see some of that intelligence, and yet some of it was downgraded, shared with the public, shared with the allies. Is this a new paradigm? Is this a new shift? Dr. Dixon, are we going to continue to see this? Could you maybe fill some blanks in for us?
That is the question. I think what we're doing at the time now is learning the lessons from how effective that was. And the intelligence community doesn't have too many opportunities to receive compliments, except for at a place like this. So thank you. But
Friendly audience, but
exactly
objective, but friendly.
Objective but friendly. But that was a time when many in Congress, many around the world, were thankful that we actually made it clear what our intelligence was saying. And a piece of it was, how do you ensure that allies and partners and others who would be impacted actually saw what we were seeing? Even internally to our community, when analysts first pose that we think there's going to be an invasion, your first question is, why? What sense does this make? And that same sort of reaction was there among many of the other allies and partners who technically saw the same things we were happening. You could use commercial imagery and actually watch the buildup around it, but no one actually thought that President Putin would do this.
Right.
No one believed it was in their interest. And I think, well, one could say it's actually sort of proved that out, but it still didn't stop him, right? So it didn't have the desired effect. However, it did bring the conversation to a place where we could have it with allies and partners, and they could also push back and tell us what they were seeing, which makes our analysis better. In this particular case, it also prevented President Putin from using what we knew he likes to use, which is disinformation campaigns to justify his actions. Making sure that the world was at least educated to the fact that this was a possibility was a very important piece of what the administration was trying to do, make sure that the world was aware of these things. Whether it's a paradigm shift will be interesting to see. I think we definitely see the power in being able to get information both declassified and downgraded when we can. And that was already happening, but it's happening at a scale now that's very different for our community. That's a lot higher than it used to be. And so building up the apparatus that you need, which is a lot of people to review the data, to make sure that you're not actually releasing something that could impact your ability to collect information at some other time. Making sure that structure, that enterprise is in place. Probably we're probably leaning into a different place, but I don't know that every conflict is going to lend itself to being able to share the data the way that it did.
That's a fair point.
Yeah.
I just want to go back to the point of disinformation. I love the fact that the United States called out that Russia was going to use some act as a pretext for a greater force. And I think that's the key point, right? Taking the air out of disinformation. Hey, you're going to see this. It's disinformation.
Right.
It's not real. And I think that is actually the kind of thinking that's creative. So for what it's worth, as a former intelligence officer, I thought that was interesting to watch, and I would continue to advocate it if the conditions were right. So thanks for sharing that. So transitioning, and this is hard to transition to October 7th, but because recently DNI Avril Haines, so your boss, said that Gaza has all the potential to really stoke generational terrorism threat. And when you start to think through those words, what does that mean? We just came out of 20 years, and now it's possible we've started another cycle. And so the question is, and I said earlier, this might be the hardball question, and the question is, are we set up now to do both? Great power competition, however you define it, this competition with China and Russia, North Korea, and at the same time, are we focused on the counterterrorism tools? Are we prepared to do that? Is the IC, the intelligence community, ready for another 20 years?
Ooh. So I'll start by saying, as you mentioned this sort of the focus on great power competition. So we've been very public about the fact that we have made divestments in the counterterrorism space and investments in great power competition, strategic competition. That was the right thing to do. Situations like we're in right now, with not only what's taking place in Israel, in Gaza, but seeing the impact that it's having on the ability of other terrorist groups to recruit more recruits. They're using the basically facts on the ground and also selectively focusing on what they share, but they're using information to continue to stoke the violence, to continue to stoke a particular narrative that we think will lead to this sort of generational thing. What we haven't, even though we did reduce our investments in counterterrorism, the National Counterterrorism Center still exists. There's still organizations or elements within our community that are looking at terrorism. We still have really powerful networks around the world of partners who we've worked with over the past 20 years who have assisted us. And even more than before, we sort of appreciate the power of these partnerships. And we're going to have partnerships for everything going forward. So we can rebuild these. We have to, though, rebuild a much more flexible organization, a much more flexible one that can not only look at the larger terrorist groups, but all of the other sort of offshoots that happen to be in the areas, as well as seeing how because of migration, because of people sort of moving country to country, there are these pockets of people that are disenfranchised who frankly are targets for recruitment. That's going to create more possibilities of sort of groups popping up in different places, in places that maybe before did not have to deal with terrorist threats. And unfortunately, some of these other groups, ISIS in particular and ISIS-K, to put a point on it, has been very successful in some of their attacks recently. And so sort of the apparatus around the world needs to build up so we can better counter these things.
Yeah, that's concerning, right? That individuals angry, have grievances, then they search for a cause, and that begins the radicalization process.
Correct. They're very vulnerable.
And of course, Gaza contributes to that because that's the narrative.
Correct. Correct.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Interesting. Now, clearly, the IC, the U.S. IC, and our foreign partners have a lot going on right now, and that's probably the understatement of the night. So, with that said, OSINT, that's of interest to our audience. We're going to do a program next year on open source intelligence. We've seen with Ukraine the rise of open source intelligence. At least it's been public as well. By definition, some of it is, right? Social media posts, purchasable databases, commercial imagery, who would have thought? And of course, in that mix is the U.S. intelligence community. And you just mentioned the OSINT strategy. That's new, right?
It is in the past month.
in the past month. So I need to read it. I should have read it before I came here, but I just found out before you and I talked that there is a new strategy, so I need to understand that. But maybe you can share with our audience, what are the challenges and what are the opportunities with open source intelligence?
I mean, this community has been leveraging open source information for a very long time. Perhaps not the way that we need it to be. And that was sort of the realization going forward. That there are many different elements within our community that benefit from information that you can either publicly acquire or commercially acquire. There's a lot of information that's out there that frankly is very helpful in closing seams, providing additional information that you can actually connect to classified information that we have. There are times when that little piece of information that you need may only be an open source information, sort of swimming in this sea of other things. What the community has realized, though, is that we haven't been treating it the way we've treated other intelligence disciplines. It doesn't have the formality of a human intelligence or a geospatial intelligence or a signals intelligence. We have practitioners, we have analysts that are out there, but have not given them the same sort of, we mentioned the standards before, we mentioned the training and the tools. We have not kept up with them. And so the strategy makes it very clear that open source information, and OSINT in particular, is very important to our community and that we need to make the investments to figure out how to use it most effectively, while also protecting privacy and civil liberties. There's been a lot of concern from the Hill, from non-governmental organizations. We've got a lot of critiques and recommendations on how we should be protecting U.S. person information in particular. And we take that very seriously, and we know that it doesn't happen if you don't build it in. If you don't build it in from the beginning, if you don't have those protections in place. So the strategy also makes clear that those protections are an important part of our modernization of this intelligence discipline that will be a formal discipline, that will have the training and tradecraft of other disciplines, because our use of this information to help our missions is not going to change. It's not going to go away. And we need to be able to do it and use it responsibly.
So that's a great segue into analytical tradecraft and artificial intelligence. How does that fit in this picture? And I will tell you, I am still out of my element when it comes to understanding the implications of AI. What does it mean in terms of an analyst? Are we going to lose analysts down the line? I know that the community, the U.S. intelligence community, has gone to great pains to say we will always keep a human being in the mix. But how does that play out with targeting down the line? Will it become too alluring to use AI tools? These are questions that I think are being wrestled with. That's why I say this is an unfinished, a painting, if you will. So can you talk a little bit about AI? And then for our audience, because it's a general audience, there are future intelligence officers here, probably actual intelligence officers, maybe from other services listening, or they will on YouTube, carefully to the what you have to say, but maybe you can lay out in layman's terms, layperson's terms. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what AI is and what are the implications for the community. And then we'll move on to questions. After one big final question, I'll wrap up.
Okay. So at its most basic, I think about AI as the ability of a machine to be able to sort of process information, to sort of think the way that the human brain does. It's sort of the inspiration for AI, and you'll hear the term neural networks, the way that the brain sort of has the nodes and the linkages. It's really trying to just help us process the information in a way that a person would, except it's probably more information than a person could actually literally be able to think through in the same way. So you want to be able to think with it. You want to be able to think faster, come up with conclusions, figure out trends, draw conclusions, predict things based on all the information you pass through these algorithms that make up the AI model. I think about it in three different ways. So it's at its simplest form, you can think of something like, how do you let tools help you with your information? And you can automate things, right? So how do you take something that is a repetitive process and just make it so that it is an automatic process? There's augmentation. So you still have the people there, but how do you have a tool that's actually going to assist them? By, for example, looking at all the information that comes in overnight while the analyst is home sleeping, and then organizing it in such a way as your priorities are X, Y, and Z. You've told me this, so I'm going to rank these things for you in terms of what you should look at first. So how do you augment what the person is going to do? AI takes it that step forward. How do you actually have it? Not just summarize the information, because summarization is really important, and large language models, as we've seen, are really good at that. But can it actually draw inferences? Can it draw conclusions? Can it actually make an analytic point based on all of the different information? That's the one that's sort of farthest out, and the one that we're sort of easing ourselves into, because we're much more comfortable with humans and the way humans process information. And right now, there's a lot of lack of understanding on how these tools work. So you wouldn't want it to come out with a forecast, for example, on what's going to happen in Israel, and not understand how it's coming up with this forecast. So we will ease into understanding by a lot of tests and a lot of evaluation. Several years ago, we also created what we call the ethical principles of the use of AI. We recognize that AI is only as good as those that are creating it, and we humans are naturally biased. So how do you make sure that you're not building the bias into the tools, or having the tools, because they're learning from information that we've collected for purposes, mainly adversaries, a lot of terrorism information. It's going to train models in a certain way that is not necessarily the way that it would be trained if it was an unlimited open data set, for example. So how do you make sure that you're not building in bias in these things, and you have checkpoints to make sure that the conclusions can be traced back, you understand how they were made, and also that they aren't leaning you in a particular direction or in a particular with a particular conclusion that isn't actually what's likely to happen.
Thank you.
Yeah?
I think that broke it down nicely. I'm smarter for having heard that.
Oh.
So let me, and that's a lot. Let me talk about your career for a second. I mean, we heard your bio, and I'm glad Amanda read it in its entirety. Actually, we probably cut out a lot, but still, it was very comprehensive. So on reflection, could you share, because I do believe there'll be some young adults out there that are listening that want to join the IC in the United States. There might even be foreign partners out there, kids across the globe, once we put this on YouTube, that'll be interested in maybe serving their nation's security needs. Like, what's your advice for these kids? What are your reflections? Because you've been here for some time. You've had an incredible career in a lot of work at NGA, really, before the headquarters probably was built, right?
Correct.
I mean, so maybe you can offer some reflections before we move on.
I just have to say that's literally the first question we got
Okay,
from
there you
the
go.
audience. So very great.
We don't usually go this long, but I
No,
think
no.
your answers have been tremendous.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
I love this question.
Okay.
Partially because when I was going through school, I had no inclination to be in the intelligence community. I really didn't. Even though I'm from DC, grew up in DC, surrounded by government, as someone who was trained as an engineer, it didn't really occur to me that there were opportunities for engineers in the government, that there was somewhere for me to actually apply these skills that I learned. And so I stumbled into the intelligence community later in life after going to grad school. What I say now, though, in terms of what keeps me here and what I see that keeps many of our colleagues here is really, it's about the mission. Is at the end of the day, there's a lot of work that we do is very similar to what you might do in any other industry. But the outcome of what we're doing is helping to keep this country safe. It's helping to provide the president and other policymakers the information that they need to make good policy. It's helping us to figure out how do we leverage the tools and the capabilities and the knowledge that we have to help America remain leaders in this world, countering what others may be trying to do, which is sort of break down democratic values, break down the idea that democracy is something to be strived for. We get to help work on things like that all the time, and it really is very motivating. You know, there are always challenges in any industry that you're in, but being able to know at the end of the day that I've helped out in some way and helped this country by serving it in this way is really what keeps me going. And so every couple of years I get to reinvent myself, as you heard in the resume, doing different things, but you can really apply what you've learned in so many ways in our community, and I think that's also a benefit of it.
Thank you. We have a cohort of future leaders that will tune in, and they often reach out to us and want to know how do we get in the community, et cetera. So we point them in the right direction.
Excellent.
So the book recommendation, I'll close, and then we'll go to questions. Amanda, I just want to put a finer point on it. The book, I'm not going to reach over and pick it up. It's by David Sanger, New Cold Wars. I highly recommend it. Many of the things that we touched on, because, of course, this isn't comprehensive. It isn't as deep as we would like. It's an hour, so we're hitting these important, hard-hitting issues. But if you really want to dive deep on kind of the trajectory of where we are right now, it is worth picking up David Sanger's book. I'm almost done with it. I confess, I've been reading it for a month. I highly recommend it. I think we've put it in the store. Amanda, I'll kick it over to you. I'm sure we have a lot of questions.
Oh my gosh. Well, I feel like we sort of took the first one from online because Chris stole it away. So we have some really, I'm going to go back and forth between our live audience. This is an intriguing one. Has the IC detected plans by Russia to interfere with the upcoming U.S. presidential election?
Oh my gosh, thank you for that. I almost feel like it's put there by some people that work for me. Only because we literally had an opportunity within recent days to actually be able to talk more about the Foreign Malign Influence Center and the work that they're doing regarding election threats. And so there was actually a couple of articles this morning that actually covered some of the conversations that took place. Yes, we do see interest by Russia, both Russia proper as well as Russian proxies, companies and the like, to want to influence this election, but not just Russia. We see many of our, frankly, both adversaries and some allies wanting to influence what happens in this particular election. And so our job is to, when there is a foreign nexus to these things, to be able to elevate it. If it's targeted at a particular candidate, if it's targeted at a particular political party or organization, if it meets a certain threshold, we have conversations with those individuals, along with the FBI, Homeland Security, kind of bring a team approach to kind of being able to notify them about what's happening so that they can better protect themselves, protect their data, protect themselves from these particular threats. But we are very concerned that there are a number of players out there who are interested in influencing what happens in this election, because what happens in this election impacts U.S. policy towards these countries. So.
And foreign countries are wrestling with the same problem, not just
absolutely.
from Russia, but from China.
Correct.
I think Canada just navigated through some interference purportedly by China on past elections. So it will continue to be in the news for sure.
It will. And that's interesting because there are some countries that really don't necessarily care about the outcome of the election, but what they want to do is they want to increase America's suspicion that it's going to be fair. They want to potentially incite violence and create those divisions within our own country. There have been historic numbers of elections already that have taken place throughout the world this year, and we've seen people using deep fakes, using AI sort of for the evil side of AI to actually be able to influence things. And so we also know that we need to be prepared that if there are recordings, videos, things like that of major political candidates or even ones that are local in states that we actually catch again that are coming from a foreign country, that we can actually flag those things and make sure that it is aware that this is intended to try to influence one of our elections.
Kind of playing off that, this one does come from our live audience, but it plays in well. They say it seems like every country out there right now are just trying to sow chaos. How do you even begin to sort through that and counter it? Excellent question.
It's hard. Chris and I were talking about this. When I started back in this job in August of 2021, and if you think about where we were in August of 2021, we were coming out of Afghanistan. And that was a huge lift for DoD, State Department, intelligence community, partners all over the world. After that, you're like, okay, maybe we'll have a chance to kind of get back to more of a normal. But we rolled right into this potential invasion of Ukraine by Russia. So now all of a sudden that's been going on. All of a sudden that became the focus. At the same time, you've got that one that went on far longer than, frankly, any of us were hoping that it was going on, still going on today. And then now with Gaza coming up. But in the meantime, you've got coups in Africa, in various countries in Africa.
Right.
You've got all sorts of interesting things happening in South America as well. So you've got things around the world that are just not moving in a peaceful direction. And it is very difficult. How do you figure out what you prioritize? And some of the prioritization, of course, is by the president. So the president's foreign policy priorities tend to influence the questions that were asked and that we need to answer. But we're required to keep up with what's happening around the world. And so it does require us to sort of split our time and figure out, what do you prioritize? Where are you willing to take risk? Where are you willing to divest so that you can put more resources in other places? And we don't always get it right, but we are always very thoughtful about how we do that.
Well, since we've touched on Russia a little bit, this is just kind of a fun question. Is Putin more like a czar?
I've heard a lot of different names that describe Putin. Uh, I prefer sort of, maybe as an authoritarian leader. He has his way about him. He's been around for a very long time. So for good or bad, we have a lot of history with him. That also gets back to, and there's some very interesting pieces written up about sort of his philosophy and why Ukraine is so important to him, and kind of understanding why he did this. Czar. There's a lot of different words that I would probably use. None of them are really positive.
And if I could just interject, and also it's this idea that Putin is so angry with how he perceives Russia was treated post-Cold War, or it never really ended from his optics. So this is his opportunity now to reverse what he thought was a universal wrong. So it's a fascinating dynamic. And again, Sanger does a great job of kind of teasing that out, on top of talking, I think to your boss, all on the record, all good stuff, just filling in some of the blanks. So
That's great. He's been reporting on this for so long and
Yeah,
piecing it all
exactly,
together. But
exactly.
any time that there's a conflict like this, you can generally look back in history and there is a reason. And is this something that we should have predicted beforehand? Maybe. But, there are many, many other things that are also happening around the world at the same time. And yet we do our best to try to balance those.
I just have to say, it is very hard to choose these questions in our limited time, but I find this fascinating. With the recent advancements in unmanned military hardware, do you see a future without conventional manned warfare, but rather autonomous warfare?
This is sort of more an opinion question.
Yes.
But you can look at the trends. We definitely see the proliferation of a lot more UAVs, and it's allowing people to sort of reach further into other countries in ways that they haven't been able to before, or to get involved in conflicts in ways that they haven't been able to before. So again, this isn't necessarily an analytic line or a prediction, but it would not surprise me if we see some of that going forward. There is an attractiveness to having machines fight and not having to actually lose human lives.
And from a counterterrorism standpoint, we were worried, maybe a decade ago about the possibility of swarming, right? So a technology, so that's not exactly, war winning necessarily, but it was a way to distract forces. And we saw the use of drones and some sophistication from Hamas from Gaza into Israel. So I think autonomous warfare is something that DoD is looking at very closely, and so are foreign actors, autonomous naval vehicles, and I know I'm not getting the acronym right. So I think that's going to continue to be something that is going to evolve over time.
Just commenting on a question about whether there is any detection that Hamas, pro-Hamas activities on American college campuses are being funded by Iran or other countries.
Those are definitely questions that we have been getting. I'm trying to remember. This is the hard part of my business. It's like, okay, if I've read something, have I read it in a place where it's releasable to the public, or it's not releasable to the public? So
we're all friends here.
So I will say this. We certainly see Iran funding a lot of proxy activity around the world. I probably will not comment on whether they are funding anything within the U.S., but I can also see how attractive it would be to foment more discord on college campuses. And that is a role that we see them possibly playing in the elections. So it's not that hard of a leap to believe it's possible, but I'll sort of leave it at that.
And I am now going to use that anytime I don't know the answer to something. I'm going to say, I'm not sure if I read that in a way I can share. Chris won't believe me, which is right. Do you believe China might take a page from Russia's book and use the Olympics as a distraction to move against Taiwan?
Cool.
Good question.
In the room, online, you are all brilliant.
Wow. Well, I would. I would say that the safety of the Olympics is of utmost importance to us, no matter from where the threat comes. And we are part of a larger coalition that is supporting France, not only because we have American athletes there, but because it's also, it's the Olympics. We've got to make sure that this is a safe series of games. So I'm going to say it's a provocative question. It's a really interesting question. Again, doesn't matter where the threat's from. We're going to try to do our best to thwart it.
And do either of you have any comment on Russian escalation off the Florida coast?
To some extent, Russia participating in exercises or Russia doing port calls in Cuba is not out of the ordinary.
Right.
Out of the ordinary can be what vessels they send and what those potential vessels could carry. And that's certainly something that our community, as well as the Department of Defense, are very key to pay attention to and to ensure that American interests are not being put at risk unnecessarily by these sort of visits. And so we will do our best to try to figure out exactly what's happening and track them if they've come, track them as they go back.
Yeah, I think it's just a strategic communication. It's a way to convey a message, and the Russians are adept at least attempting that. So I think this is just another message that they are going to be positioned to be disruptive if they want to be disruptive, and they're going to be in our hemisphere because they can be.
That would be the best.
I mean, that's
the
kind of how I
messaging.
see
Definitely
it.
messaging.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had a number of questions relating to that. So thank you both for commenting on that. This one is much more personal for you, Dr. Dixon. What were the main challenges you faced being a female in a male-dominated area working at CIA, and also the advantages of female officers who work at the CIA?
Ooh, this one specifically, it's interesting. I think I'll answer a bit more broadly because my CIA time was only a couple of years.
Yeah, I'm interested. It was really targeted at the question. Was really
very
targeted at
narrowly
CIA.
targeted. I would say being first of all, our community is one that benefits from a great deal of diversity, right? We recognize the strength of having our community represent America, of being able to recruit people from all over the country with all diverse backgrounds to have a seat at the table to help us come up with very creative decisions and outcomes. When I became an engineer, and that was sort of step number one in sort of being in an area that can be considered very male-dominated. In my mechanical engineering program, there was actually a good number of women, and so I never felt like we were sort of that there was an unbalance. But I know in certain fields there definitely are. For me, I have been very lucky to work with colleagues who judge me on my abilities as opposed to what I look like. Having said that, as I sort of progressed in my career and took on roles of responsibilities, I tell a story of walking into rooms as sort of the one that's hosting the meeting, or the one that's leading the organization that's hosting a meeting with others. And people are still waiting for the host or waiting for the principal because they don't think it looks like me. They're waiting for somebody else to walk into the room. And this happened a couple times, and it doesn't happen anymore because now wherever I go, people have my bio, they know what I look like, so no surprise. But I tell people that you can react in one of two ways. You can let it bother you such that you can't do your job, and it messes with your confidence, or you can brush it off as just sort of in lack of exposure for the individual, and then just get about the work. And so that's been my process. I've just let me just go do the work. Let me show them why I deserve to be here, why I am in this role, and hope that more people have that opportunity. But I know that I've been very, very lucky by not having people that were actively trying to prevent me from being successful. And that's unfortunately not everyone's experience these days.
And a follow-up from a different questioner, but what skills have led you to have such a successful career?
I attribute it partially to moving around a lot and trying new things. So my time on the Hill taught me a lot about budgeting and advocacy and how laws are made and how budgets are authorized and appropriated. And as you move higher in your career, those skills can be really important. Having great relationships with members of Congress and staffers is very important. Being able to be in corporate communications also taught me a lot about the importance of communicating. How do you tell your story in a way that people understand it? How do you engage and know when to lean in, when to share information, and when you should sort of just be quiet and sort of not be in the spotlight. Being an engineer, you learn how to solve problems, how to break down really complicated things into smaller things that you can sort of tick off one by one, how to work in teams, how to be able to take a problem and divide it among different people with their various skill sets and come up with a solution that's going to actually work and do something different, beneficial for the community. And so it really has been all of these different things coming together that I think in these later roles has really helped me be an attractive candidate when people are looking for a deputy, for example.
Back into the trenches, how does Russia using North Korean ballistic missiles affect relations with China?
Ooh, yeah, right? That's a good one. Certainly, anything that creates instability in the East is concerning to China. I'll say that number one. An emboldened North Korea is a challenge. And a challenge has the possibility of then becoming something that's more unstable. And so the connection, I would say, is they're concerned, they're worried for sort of the reasons that the unintended consequences that can come by that closeness. I think China's also used to being sort of the central thing that everyone kind of looks to and kind of gravitates to. And so when other partners are connecting each other, you worry about your loss of power. And so I would say there's a lot of dynamics that are happening in that space. From our perspective, of course, it's a matter of all of these countries are enabling Russia, enabling the aggressiveness towards Ukraine, enabling the aggressiveness that they're trying to do, and the things that they're trying to push on the world in terms of authoritarianism, in terms of these questions of sovereignty. All of that is sort of not moving things in a good direction. Chris?
No.
No,
You got any thoughts on that one?
No, we had Dr. Pack when the question was asked. We had Dr. Pack, former CIA analyst. A few months ago, rather, on a spy chat, and she really did a deep dive on North Korea. And it seems like, knock on wood for you, that things have calmed down in North Korea. At least that's my assessment as an outsider of late. But I just see them continuing to be a bit of a spoiler when they're not getting the attention that they need.
Spoiler is an interesting choice of words, given the balloons that they've been
trash,
sending
the
over.
trash
Oh,
balloons. Yeah.
very good. Yeah. I'm never that quick.
Oh my gosh. Who are the biggest human threats right now? Are they sleeper agents, so-called useful idiots, moles, professionals?
There are individuals who I will speak about sort of like what I would consider sort of a counterintelligence threat or an insider threat in our terminology. Individuals who, for whatever reason, find themselves aligned, beholden to receiving money from, receiving orders from other intelligence organizations around the world that we would consider adversarial. And oftentimes they're quite aware that they're in these relationships and they're receiving money, and sometimes they're unwitting that they're actually receiving money and sort of they're the puppet to these adversaries who are trying to leverage their accesses, their information, their contacts, their platforms, their voice to get some sort of message out there, or get something out, or get something from. And so it's a little combination of both. Individuals who are sort of financially motivated or upset with the U.S. for whatever reason, who might want to do this, as well as those who are just sort of unwittingly drawn in. We can help educate the latter. The former, we just have to weed out.
And this ties back into the Cold War. Again, the trajectory of the Cold War, the history of the Cold War with regard to useful idiots, I think, was a Stalin term. The idea that you were going to use somebody as an agent of influence. Our very own General Kalugin, albeit he's aging, he was one of our founding members, former KGB officer, founding board members, I should say. And he used to say it was far more valuable to have a useful idiot, he didn't use that term, an agent of influence, rather than recruiting an American that had hands in the safe secrets. They wanted influence from a Russian Soviet perspective. So I think that's going to continue to be a theme that we watch with the spate of elections that are happening. And you alluded to polarization and authoritarianism. So all that stuff, it's almost a perfect storm, isn't it?
And then you add that to the technology, so the digital platform that
Right.
frankly can take a voice and amplify it so much more broadly than ever in history.
Well, we've asked about how to break in to the intelligence field, but I like this question a lot. How are you recruiting the best of the new generation and sharing legacy lessons?
That's a great
with
question.
them?
So one of the things that I love to do as we travel around the country, whether it's going to meetings or meeting with partners, is I have my team find a university or high school, in particular one that has a diverse student body, and also one where the intelligence community hasn't visited. So one by one, student by student, school by school, trying to just expose people to this great opportunity of public service, of supporting, using their skills in national security, and then very specifically, trying to recruit them into the intelligence community. We have great internships with very meaningful projects that we give the interns to work on during the summer, which makes them want to come back. And we have really good conversion rates from intern to a full-time employee, and so we will continue to do things like that. But a bit of it is just get the word out. You'll see on websites that we run that we're trying to help demystify by putting analytic products online, by introducing some of our workforce through our own social media platforms, what different work roles do, and these individuals who are just everyday people like everyone else who just happen to come into the community and do some really great work. And so how do we just raise the awareness of the possibility of coming and working for us for those individuals who might just get that spark and decide that they're going to apply and try to be in our community in the future.
Very last question. Do you have a book recommendation?
Ooh. It's funny. I really should. I don't at the moment. But when I do tend to read books, I read a lot of leadership books. And so I haven't read anything recently, which is sort of why I'm sort of hedging at this point in time. But I also like books that are about the way people think and how do you, in particular, deal with people who are trying to deceive you, and being able to sort of catch that kind of behavior around you, people who are trying to deceive or influence you in a way. How do you protect yourself against things like that? So those tend to be the kinds that I am attracted to.
Oh, that's interesting. We do some programs on, neurolinguistics and picking up some of those.
The cues, yeah.
Right. Amanda, you've run those programs here.
Yeah, we often do them around Valentine's Day.
Yeah. Great
That would
marketing.
be effective.
That's right.
And they're very popular. Chris, do you have any final thoughts before I wrap this up?
No, again, I told Dr. Dixon I didn't have the pleasure of working with you, but I talked to people in the community and said that we were going to do Spy Chat, and many of them will join us virtually. And they just said that, you're a tremendous leader. So I am very grateful that you shared some of your insights on these cross-cutting, important issues that we're dealing with. And I will tell you, not to continue to go back to the Cold War that I was a part of, but it seemed that the world at the time was extremely complicated, post-wall coming down, and we were wrestling with what we thought were wicked problems, vexing problems. But I have to say, I've never seen anything like the complexities of today's world. So thank you for what you do. Thank you for the community that you lead, and thanks for those in the community that are tuning in and that are here tonight. So I enjoyed this talk, and we're very grateful that you supported the Spy Museum by coming in.
Happy to be here. Thank you for what you do. And we work with some amazing people in the community who really are dedicated to this country and the values of this country. And, having an opportunity to kind of amplify their work is just, it means a lot to me. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much.
I want to